we're going to hear now about an inquiry that's specifically created for students that aren't in high school, and also that inquiries can be created on local events and local incidences. So I'm going to introduce Erin Burden, and Erin is the teacher in residence for diversity and cultural competency in Region 15. And Erin, maybe what the best call would be if you could introduce the other folks on your in the presentation.
Yep, we'll do introductions to get started. Excellent, thank you. So good morning, everyone. I'm so excited to be with you. And it was inspiring to be in the first session and energizing. Thank you to the Connecticut Council for Social Studies and the Democracy Center at the Old State House, Connecticut Humanities, and the State Department of Education for the opportunity to be in community with you this morning. So Steve nicely introduced me. Please also feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat box, because my co-presenters just logged on a little while ago, so they might not know who everybody is. And it's always fun to know who we're with this morning. And my colleagues and I are delighted to share a session to you today that's focused on the importance of local history as an impetus for inquiry. And the particular story that we'd like to share with you, we believe, is ripe for inquiry about how we may, as humans, resolve conflict through informed action. And so I'm joined by two wonderful co-presenters who will now introduce themselves.
Well, good morning. My name is Ed Edelson, and I've been a resident of Southbury, Connecticut since 2004, when my wife and I moved there to open a bed and breakfast after a career with an international company for several decades. That is where I learned about the story of what happened in Southbury in 1937, and that is the local history around which today's webinar will center.
Hi, I'm Sheila Power. I moved to Southbury, Connecticut in 2012. I started teaching in Longmeadow Elementary School in 2015, and then a couple of years ago, Erin introduced me to the book Lois's Story, and I found it really interesting. It was very local history for our students, and we incorporated it into my reading class for 4th grade.
Great, thanks. So the outline for the session is as follows. We'll hear from Ed, who's going to offer some background about when Southbury, Connecticut said no to Nazis in 1937, which, yes, you heard that correctly. He'll orient us to this Connecticut story that inspired the teaching and learning with students that led us to be with you here today. Then second, I'll talk through some of the formal ways that we've gone about planning and implementing instruction, as well as share an example of an inquiry that we developed related to this story. Sheila will share thoughts and insights and experiences from her 4th grade classroom. And then after that, we'll have just a bit of hands-on time in breakout rooms with an excerpt from Ed's book, Lois's Story, and a young girl's inspiration helps stop hate and fear. And in those breakout rooms, we'll just have a few minutes to talk together about a particular portion of the Educator guide that we developed, and just give you all a chance to connect and use your creativity to imagine possibilities. And then last, we'll close with sharing some resources. And now I'm going to turn it over to Ed.
Well, good morning again. Okay, so I would like to begin by playing a short clip from a newsreel that appeared in the late 1930s. So if we could play that.
Mr. Chairman, 2 of my great-great-grandfathers and 4 of my great-grandfathers fought for liberty. So did the other people of this town. I call upon all of you here to keep the Nazis out.
So when I first saw this little clip, I was captivated by the words as well as the demeanor of Jenny Hinman, a resident of Southbury, whose ancestors had played a role in the town since they first came up the Housatonic River in the late 1670s. Many of you might be wondering, what is she talking about? Nazis in Southbury in the 1930s? When I moved to Southbury in 2004, not much was known as the story had faded from most people's memories. That has changed after the efforts of a handful of people. In 2012, when I was first selectman of the town, I worked with several others to produce a proper video documentary to tell the story in more detail and to include as much oral history as possible. The premiere was a big event in our small town. Over 1,500 people signed up to be at the premiere. In producing the movie, we were able to track down the descendants of one of the key leaders who presided over the town meeting where Jenny Hinman spoke out in that clip that you just saw. He was the Reverend Lindsay. His 3 daughters and their children and their grandchildren came up to see the premiere. Needless to say, they were overjoyed to see the town honor their father 75 years after his important actions to stand up to the Nazis, especially when very few were willing to do that. Go to the next slide. We were able to create another documentary based on the weekend that the movie premiered to capture attendees' reactions, like you can see in the face of the woman on the screen, that shows how they were emotionally moved by the movie. I'm going to show you another clip where the director of the documentary, Scott Sniffen, reflects on the importance of telling the story in his documentary. It also shows the reaction of the eldest daughter of Reverend Lindsay, whose name was Lois.
But I realized these were not tears of sadness, but emotions stirred by the film. It brought me back to the town hall where the Lindsay family had viewed the exhibit. I could see the pride in their eyes. And like the Lindsays, the audience was somehow touched as well. Maybe a memory of their childhood, pictures of family and friends, old photographs of days gone by. Perhaps in some way, by watching my little film, fond memories of their mom and dad were reawakened. Proud thoughts of a people who took a stand and said no to prejudice and hate, patriots of an era sometimes forgotten. I guess I had touched their hearts. Maybe that's why after Lois Lindsay saw the film for the first time, she handed me a small note. It was a quote by Edmund Burke. It read, "The only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing."
And the people of Southbury did something.
I should add that last picture
But I realized,
of the people, last picture of all the people in the audience, that was at the town meeting where they voted. And most of you probably know many of our town meetings never get that many people to turn out. But when Lois says Southbury did something, she is referring to the peaceful action taken at a town meeting, again, the picture you just saw, to keep the Nazis from building their largest training camp in Southbury. At that time, they had about 24 camps in operation across the United States, all focused on teaching the ideas in Hitler's book, Mein Kampf, and on military drilling. And now, as a result of the Home of the Brave, when Southbury said no to the Nazis documentary, we ended up going on a little bit of a tour, and it was very well received and shown to many adult groups, as well as in some high schools. The documentary was brought to the attention of the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum. In 2018, the museum included the story in a very large exhibit called Americans and the Holocaust. Recently, it was announced that Ken Burns has prepared a 3-part documentary called The United States and the Holocaust that is based on the same material and should appear or is scheduled to appear in September on PBS stations. We expect the Southbury story will be included there as his team has been out to Southbury already. We go to the next slide. The sermons of Reverend Lindsay play an important role of waking up the Southbury citizens to the threat of Nazism and the need to take action. The exhibit includes some of the words from the sermon preached by Reverend Lindsay. the original typewritten sermon, and his typewriter that his daughter Lois had kept all those years before donating it to the museum. As Reverend Lindsay says in his sermon, quote, "These camps are undesirable, first, because they're unchristian, second, because they're un-American, and third, because they are pro-Nazi." Yet Southbury was the only community in the United States that said no. These artifacts and many more documents saved by Lois are now part of the museum's archives. A link to all of this is provided in the resource section. If we go to the next slide. My wife and I attended the opening of the exhibit in April of 2018. Afterwards, we were looking for books for our grandchildren in the bookstore. The combination of the pride I felt being a Southburyan and my reaction every time I watched the video clip of Lois saying, quote, "Southbury did something," unquote, led me to think that what was needed was a book for younger students in order to share the important themes of the story, especially the bravery of those who stood up to those who wanted to spread hate and fear of others. Then I remembered that Lois was about 10 years old when the Nazis came to see her father at their home. They wanted to convince him that he was wrong to oppose their building of the largest camp in Southbury. As Lois tells it, they wanted to intimidate him, and she was quite frightened by the big men in military uniforms driving large black cars, sights that were not common in rural Southbury in 1937. That's a picture of Lois as a 10-year-old on the right, and you already saw her when she was 85 at the premiere. Well, the result was if we go to the next slide, the result was my historical fictional account of the Southbury story that, as you heard, is called Lois's Story, A Young Girl's Inspiration Helps to Stop Hate and Fear. I should add that I've never written a children's book before, but it has been one of the great joys of my life. A friend suggested that I share a copy of the book with Erin, who you now know is the Region 15 teacher in residence for diversity and cultural competence. That was some of the best advice I've ever been given. Soon afterwards, Erin organized a video conference session with Rabbi Eric Holocaust, who was also instrumental in producing the video documentary, and myself to collaborate on the development of an educator's guide for teachers to use in the 4th grade. I was very impressed with the guide we produced. Seeing it being used in the 4th grade classes has been extremely gratifying to me as an author. The student response has been way beyond my expectations, and much like what has happened with the story, it helped to much like the video documentary, it has opened the story to a whole new audience. And today we hope that you will consider helping us to expand that audience even further.
Great, thanks, Ed. So one of the great gifts that I think about being an educator is the opportunity to build an ever deepen community with others, not only in our classrooms or our school contexts, but importantly in the places in which we choose to work or live or serve with the broader community. And so building meaningful partnerships because people shape place and place shapes people, I feel is really important. So I hope that while you notice that our story, our shared work has taken place in one community, this is not just a town story of Southbury, it's a Connecticut story. And we're looking to share with you ways in which we've worked to resonate for all children. And so I think my being connected with Rabbi Eric Polikoff, who you see on the right, and with Ed, who's with us today, who's a Southbury resident, a local author, and he's a former first selectman who served in our local government, to me is an example of getting to the why of being an educator and truly serving a community. We were united in effort to address our own compelling question, really, that we were investigating as adults in the community, which is here on the screen. And so we want to invite you to think about that with us. How can we engage students in local history? How can we mine our local history to inspire young people to study it and then to take informed action themselves? So as Ed referenced, we began by developing an educator guide that could be used and drawn from to support educators at first, we just did this for like using the text for interactive read alouds or as small group reading instruction, or as a jumping off point for teachers to apply their own creative genius to. But as you'll see today, we then developed an inquiry from there. So in our complex world, working alongside the young people that are entrusted to our cares in schools to recognize unfairness on an individual level, like biased speech, or injustice at a more institutional or systemic level, like discrimination or systemic discrimination, is critical. Not only must we be able to skillfully critique to improve, but we must also have strong models to study and the skill sets that are required to make principled decisions about how to take a stand, when to take a stand, how to plan or carry out a collective action, and which strategies are the most effective. So for the Educator's Guide, we rooted in these overarching purposes, and then all right, I'm not sure where I bumped off, but I'll just say that what you see on the screen right now is just for you to see that when taken together, we thought about our process and how what the Lois's story allows for us is richer teaching and learning experiences. And so since we created the original Educator's Guide, we've drafted an inquiry using the C3 framework that we'll share. Right, so first here, because you are maybe unfamiliar with this Connecticut story, here are just some highlights that we'd like to share, which we'll work a bit with today. So the why, like, according to the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum, elementary school can be an ideal place to begin discussing the value of diversity and the danger of bias and prejudice. And these critical themes can be addressed through local and national historical events, which could then later be reinforced when students in later grades are studying the Holocaust. We felt it was really important to make space for dialogue around affirming that we believe diversity makes our communities beautiful and stronger. We also wanted to set students up to expect that they're going to foster critical consciousness and collectively consider a local example of principles of social justice in action. Another thing that we wanted to teach into is the power of symbols. There's an illustration in chapter 1, which you'll see today, which shows a car with Nazi flags on it. So here we noticed a teachable moment, an opportunity to teach into and deepen understanding of the power of symbols. In a little bit, when we're in breakout rooms, you'll have the chance to dig into that particular portion of the text and experience the ways in which maybe we can work to address the swastika in particular, and more broadly promote our students' awareness and understanding of symbols, along with inspire reflection on personal and collective responsibility. This is also a model of a young person as a driver of social change, as Ed has described in the introduction, because as a 10-year-old Lois Lindsay, it was her idea for her father to use his social capital as a well-respected minister in his Connecticut town, and his platform in his church to preach about the dangers of the German-American Bund, using land that they had purchased to form a youth training camp that was aligned with Hitler youth camps. So we worked to craft thoughtful questions around studying Lois as a model of a young person who's driving social change, so that we could make room with students to evaluate her reasoning, her strategy, and imagine ways that we could apply what we learned to our own lives. There's purposeful questioning we've embedded to examine conflict in the context of this Connecticut community's challenging of the status quo, and when bias surfaces in communities, what happens? So for instance, there's chapter 3 is called The Sermon, and that's when Lois's father, Reverend Lindsay, makes his public sermon denouncing the proposed Nazi training camp in Southbury. And then subsequently, Lois encounters peers at her school that are making discriminatory remarks about Jewish people. So the text also states that some people disagreed with taking action by proposing zoning regulations in Southbury as a possible solution to prevent the German American Bund from creating this youth training camp. And so I tell you all of these examples because they all are opportunities for us to examine conflict. Lois, Reverend Lindsay, and Ed Core, who's the first selectman in the text, they act in solidarity with Jews by taking informed action when the German American Bund planned to spread Nazi ideas in Connecticut. So we focused on opportunities for meaning making using this text as a springboard for what allyship or what acting in solidarities with others or what upstanding opposed to bystanding means. And what it takes to enact it. Always, we want our work to be relevant to students' current realities, which we talked a little bit about in the first session this morning. And so we ask students to consider issues they care deeply about that require these things. And then lastly, we call for students to consider the concept of legacy. Like, what is a legacy? What does it mean that this story is part of our local history and legacy? And why study it now in 2022? So after working with this text for a couple of years now, we developed an inquiry example that we'd like to share with you. So this inquiry is inspired by the promise that we saw in studying this story as a model for taking informed action, particularly in the face of injustice. Here you can see the compelling question: in what ways can a community and a democracy respond when faced with injustice? And we know that, that the inquiries are driven by questions because questioning is key to learning. And in crafting this particular question, it was inspired by both students, which we'll talk more about later, but it was also a teacher guide. It's a guided inquiry as we learned about in the first session today. I'm gonna just pull up the inquiry now so that we can walk it through, but hopefully my screen sharing's not too funky for whatever was going on before and you can see it okay. So this particular compelling question is here because it focuses on this enduring concern about when communities are faced with injustice, and it's sensitive to the idea that young children are often deeply invested in fairness. And then for the staging the question portion of the inquiry template, we want here to introduce students to the ideas behind the compelling question in order to generate their curiosity about the topic. And so we just drafted brainstorm ways people in a democracy can respond to injustice. And then here you can see our supporting questions. Because the compelling question can be taken in so many directions, the supporting questions we crafted help define the curricular parameters to give shape to this inquiry. And in supporting the kids in addressing the compelling question. So we included these three for that purpose, and also in order to embed identified disciplinary concepts that are open to interpretation. So for instance, support, just to share it out, I'll just share supporting question 1. And the German American Bund wanted to force their ideas on all citizens of German descent. Have you ever, or what if you had, a friend try to convince you to accept a set of ideas that you were not comfortable with? How did you respond, or how would you respond? How do you wish that you had responded? And then for our formative tasks and featured sources, these tasks were designed to make space for students to grapple with the supporting questions. And the featured sources, which I'll scroll down in a moment after you've had a chance to look at the formative tasks. They all are curated so that our students must practice making careful investigations through reading, through analysis, through synthesis, to help them make evidence-based claims. And that's so needed in a world where anyone, as we can see in the media every day, can easily come to some answer based on speculation or opinion. So we've crafted these tasks and compiled these sources to offer opportunities for our students to keep thinking and keep cultivating understanding in order to address that compelling question in a substantive way. And so then, and all of this we'll share with you at the end. So I just want to highlight the summative performance task for a moment. Students here are asked to circle back to the compelling question, and in the summative performance task to respond through argument. And while the formative tasks and featured sources along the way include some opportunities and space to dig into content and skills, we try to build those in a way that scaffold in complexity so that in the end they can tackle and circle back to the compelling question to address that in their summative performance task, which is, what can we learn from the way the community of Southbury responded to the German-American Bund in 1937 to help solve problems of injustice in the world around you today? Construct an argument using specific claims and evidence from our inquiry. And the summative extension is there just as a way to offer additional and alternative ways to express their argument, and linking it to our contemporary context of hate groups today. And then last, with the taking informed action section, we hope here to have provided a model for students to civically engage in an inquiry that is rooted in civics. We hope in this example that you see the opportunity for students to use their disciplinary knowledge and skills and perspectives to inquire about problems that they see in the public around them, to deliberate with their peers on how to define these issues, and then how to take constructive, independent, or collaborative action with one another. So all of this is to say that the design of this inquiry was inspired by the teaching and learning that really took place in Sheila's 4th grade classroom this year. And so Sheila's now going to share some experiences and perspectives from working with her 4th grade students. She worked with about 80 4th graders. And I'm just going to stop sharing for a second. She worked with about 80 4th graders. And so I'm going to turn it over to you, Sheila.
Thank you, Erin. Hi, everyone. Yes, this year we were departmentalized in 4th grade. So I taught reading to all of the 4th grade in our school. The previous year I was self-contained and I taught it to my class then. I really liked using this book. It was a good bridge for me. We have a nonfiction unit in reading, and the end of it focuses on studying historical time periods. And then we go into our historical fiction unit, and Lois's story was such a great bridge for that because it was a real event, real time period, and then it was written as a narrative from Lois's kind of perspective, and it was a good bridge going into the historical fiction unit. I really enjoyed it because it is local history, Connecticut history. Many of my students actually have played or play soccer on a field not far from the church where Reverend Lindsay preached that sermon and where they went to have some of the meetings. So when you start bringing it into that kind of perspective for the kids, they realize that stuff happened all around them. I like that it is written from the child's perspective, and it gives them kind of the sense that students can make a difference in their communities. It can be large or small. I think it shows how the people in the community can impact the community. And we talk about how Southbury may look very different if those zoning laws were not put in place, or how even the community and the sense of community may have been different if they never stopped the German Bund from building that training camp there. Our students love it for many different reasons. Some of them just love because they pass the church and they know and they can sense, you know, and relate to Lois. Some of them had connections. I had a student that had connections with the rabbi in the synagogue that kind of got the story going and out there. And when we had a Zoom meeting with them, they were really interested in that. I had most students go home and teach it to their families. It's not a really well-known story. It's getting out there more, but most of them have never heard it before. I had students go home and teach it last year and this year. This year, I had a girl come and say she wanted to take the book home to bring it to her parents because they thought that, they hadn't heard of it and they were longtime residents and they thought, she must be mistaken, and she wanted to bring it home to kind of show it to them and teach it to them. And I think Lois's story and the lessons that Erin has, worked on to go with it, it begins to make the kids understand that, they can make a difference in their community, do good in their community, in little ways and big ways. I think the best example is this year, I had a student, after Erin discussed that lesson about being an upstander, she kind of wanted to go further with it. And she came to me and said she wanted to start an Upstanders club. And then she went to Erin and talked about it, and Erin helped her kind of, get her mission. She really wanted it to be something that kids could learn to stand up for themselves and stand up for others, and that they see when they see unfairness or bullying and things like that. So I guess, Erin, do you want to show the video of Natalia? All right, great.
The thing that inspired me about Lois's story is that there was this camp that the German American Bund made, and trying to tell people that all the things that are not true about the Jewish people and ideas about the Jewish people that are not right. So Lois heard about all of this while she was with her father. She heard all about it, and then she told her dad to speak out and warn people about what they're doing. And later on, Lois and her dad got some envelopes of people thanking them, and some are angry. But in the letters, they told them to hide their names in it, because they think they're gonna get threatened by the Nazis if they find their name in the envelope, because they'll be angry that they think that what they're doing is right, which they think is wrong, because they think that Jewish should be threatened. And I don't think that's right, so that's why I made this club, so I could also tell that story and also represent it by making this club.
So why do you think the Upstanders Club is important in your school community?
Well, I think it's important because there's some kids in littler grades and bigger grades that are getting probably bullied by their older siblings, some of their friends maybe, and probably some of their other people in their family. So I'm thinking that if I made something to help people, they would know how to stand up for themselves and make a change in the whole world and the community.
So thank you, Sheila. Natalia is a beautiful example of how she took her learning from working with Ed's text, Lois's story, and then she studied Lois as an example of someone who was resolving conflict through informed action, and then she took informed action herself by launching this club at her school in Sheila's class, which has 54 members of it. And you can see here on the screen that she has been acknowledged just within the past few weeks by Johanna Hayes and by Senator Blumenthal as well, by Congresswoman Hayes and Senator Blumenthal. And so she was really the inspiration for the inquiry that we ended up developing. And so that's kind of our story that we wanted to share with you today. And you've been listening to us for a long time, and I know that's not good teaching, should have been engaging you all along. And so I'd love to open up breakout rooms for just a couple of moments Ed has kindly included a PDF of just the first chapter of Lois's story, so you can get a taste for this Connecticut stories text. And then, like I mentioned before, there's also an excerpt from the Educator's Guide where we've crafted questions to really dig into the power of symbols there. And so we're just inviting you to taste the first chapter of the text. It's short, and then to talk together about what you're thinking and how you might imagine using this text in your classroom setting, or what other ideas are coming up for you. So the first thing that I need to do is pop in the chat access to all of you to have a file. So this is what you'll need in the breakout room. So it should be sending right now. And so we'll have the breakout rooms for maybe just a little under 10 minutes. So if you take a few moments, in the first few moments in breakout rooms, maybe the first 3 minutes or so, to read the first chapter of the text, and then the rest of the time to discuss, then we'll come back together to debrief afterwards. Did everybody get the file?
It went through.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, so I'm going to open those rooms and close them in a little under 10 minutes. People are just trickling back from breakout rooms. Give a couple more minutes, couple more seconds.
Awesome.
All right, so everybody should be back. I just don't see Edelson back, who was gonna. Oh, there he is. Okay. All right, Ed, I'm gonna turn it over to you to facilitate conversation. Oops, you're just on mute.
I'm at a little disadvantage. How many breakout groups were there?
3.
Great. So I'm just wondering if a representative from breakout group 1 could come back and tell us if they had a chance. First of all, do they have luck opening the document? And any reaction to either the story or the Educator's Guide that you'd like to share with us? Was it what you were expecting?
Yeah, we were able to open up the document, and feel free in my group if anybody wants to pipe in and share. And we were able to talk about it, different extremes. We were talking about like from the first grade level all the way up through high school, but just that opportunity with the, we loved the questioning that was available in there to use as a guide with the story. And also how we were able to connect the story to just current events that are even happening in the world with our kids as they're capable of understanding or comprehending them. But I think it was Lisa, I believe it was, that was sharing about how her kiddos in first grade are just having such success with asking these deep, meaty, or answering and responding to these deep, meaty questions that were included in the document, and how they're so helpful to have. And I was just stating that I think what's so great about this is that she was saying how the younger students seem to be doing better than some of our older students, perhaps because of the experiences that they're having across all content areas with doing this, and I was mentioning that they're doing this in not just math and reading and science and social studies across the board, with having to explain themselves and give evidence, where our older students might not be as used to doing this, but the younger students, that's all they know. So we were just talking about that a little bit.
That's really gratifying, because I did get some pushback when I was first thinking of writing this, saying, well, this is a story that would not be appropriate for younger people. They wouldn't be able to understand or grasp it. And I think what you're saying, at least what I'm taking from what you're saying, we tend to underestimate what they're thinking about and how they can assimilate this kind of information. How about group 2? I know we don't have too much time, so I'll just keep moving through. Thank you for your comments.
As a member of group 2, I would just say that what this activity shows is that this is a general comment, but in many of our towns, there's these fascinating local stories that many times teachers and students have no idea that they exist. And sometimes, you know, I'm guessing that many of you do this, but interacting with local historical societies and organizations, sometimes they're dying to have you, you know, boy, I wish a teacher would contact us. You know, there's stories that they have and they're ready to help you with in many situations.
I think you're absolutely right. Every town has a little story. And how about group 3? I don't know if that's the group I was in with Ed. But if I was group 3, let's see.
I think
Well, I was with it. Go ahead.
I don't know if I was group 3, but I think we mostly just kind of made a connection back to the quote that was shared from an elementary teacher at the beginning of the first session about how a lot of times, you know, literary texts will reference historical information, but they don't get the time they need in terms of historical context and doing the work of social studies. And so we were just kind of, you know, talking about the opportunity that this story and the primary sources that were shared really provide an opportunity to kind of integrate ELA and social studies in a deep way that, you know, it provides opportunities for students to do the work of both disciplines.
Thank you. Erin, I think in the interest of time, maybe we should just go to explain some of the resources.
Yeah, and Sandy, thanks for what you wrote in the chat as well, that this could be taught in a high school classroom and then become a template for high schooler civic engagement and action. And I think that, you know, just in closing, as social studies educators, as interdisciplinary educators, like it's our job to give students tools to be active citizens. And this is, that's exactly the point of the presentation today. So thank you for summarizing it so nicely there. In closing, just want to share a Google Doc that everybody should have access to. I'll share it in Google Doc form. I just put the link in the chat, as well as I'll share it in Word doc form, which also is going through in the chat right now. And we'd just like to close by thanking you and sharing our contact information, should that be helpful in any way. And in the doc that we just put in the chat, there's lots of resources which we don't have time to go over, but they're annotated and explained. So hopefully they really explain themselves, and definitely want to be respectful to the next presenters who are already here. So thank you everyone for the opportunity to share with you this morning and be inspired by you. We really appreciate the chance.
Thanks to our 3 presenters. Very interesting session and a very useful session.